welcome to the Good Sports Podcast, diving deep into the world of sports and development. My name's David Terrace. I'm joined by fellow Good Sports, Sarah Begg and Lee Booth.
Hello.
Hiya.
So we've got some nice feedback so far after our first pod, our last episode. Sarah, what's the response been, do you think?
It's been really great, actually. I've been surprised at how many people have seemed to found us. I think you've been doing a good job on Twitter there, Dave. And a lot of stuff coming back about enjoying the sort of overview that the podcast gave us in terms of sport and development, and lots of people interested in potentially getting involved and coming on as guests. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, and for me, there was a really nice bit, but we got an email from a chap called Richard McGrath in Australia who sort of commented on how useful he found Charlie's interview as well. So it feels like we're doing a little bit to join up practitioners across the world, which is really exciting. Cool. Okay, so to kick off this episode, we're going to have a look at a few news items from the world of sport and development. Lee, what have you got?
Yeah, well, the one I've been looking at really, I guess, is not specifically sport for development, but it was the announcements by Comic Relief about changing their advertising campaigns away from, what they're calling white saviour adverts, and that was really on the back of some backlash that came around an Ed Sheeran advert, which was variously described as poverty porn. And I think other organisations are now starting to follow suit. So there's been other stuff out there from Oxfam and others about them also changing the way that they look at their advertising. So I wondered if you guys had seen that, what your thoughts on that were, and I guess then how that also translates down to sport for development charities, and I guess how it also translates down to smaller organisations. The big players have got lots of money and they've got lots of media teams behind them, and they're struggling to get the message correct. How difficult it is for smaller organisations.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say that this approach has proved historically to work. So money does come in through these campaigns. I have seen it, and it's really encouraging that Oxfam are doing this. I think there's lots of lessons that we can learn through sport and development as well about how we portray positive images, not always showing the problem.
Yeah, and I think you can also highlight challenges without that real poverty porn angle. I mean, we've seen some really good examples of how you can highlight challenges by creative approaches. So War Child have an excellent advertisement that is highlighting the plight of refugees, but that plays on the sort of idea that a father is a child's sort of superhero. I won't give away exactly how that looks, but if you go to our blog, we'll make sure that we put the link to that video up. But it just shows that you can highlight challenges and really sort of tug on people's heartstrings without reverting to these kind of classic tropes.
And I think it's a kind of challenge, bringing it back to sport for development, that we work with our partners in Africa from Cricket Without Boundaries, but we've been accused in the past of a kind of a colonial approach, taking cricket abroad and we know best type thing. But certainly in terms of our thinking around ambassadors, that we're learning a lot from people in the field out there, and we're certainly moving that way. So yeah, I mean, Lee, you brought it up. What's your take on it?
I agree with all of that, and I think it's easy to understand why people get upset with this type of advertising and the white saviour and rich celebrities being in country having what looks like often like photo opportunities. I think there's an extra challenge as well for sport for development charities in how we use the type of material that we can capture from projects, and I'm thinking about pictures I've seen in the past where I think out of context it's very hard to judge the benefit of what the sport is bringing. So I'm thinking again, pictures I've seen of happy smiling children in refugee camps, for example, playing football or playing other sports, and how it often looks a little bit jarring that we're taking football there and out of context. Is that the right thing to do? Is that what these children and these people on the ground need? So for me it's really important we always bounce it back to trying to get stories from people who are impacted by the projects and people who are on the ground.
I think it would be great if anybody knows some really good examples of sport and development organisations doing this kind of advertising really well. Then let us know, because we'd be really keen to see what it is and we can share it with everybody. So I picked my piece up via Athletes for Rights on Twitter, and it's by Tracy Holmes at ABC. And it's basically just highlighting how the Commonwealth Games has become a real platform for sort of political comment. So it was particularly highlighting how the Rwandan beach volleyball team observed a minute's silence before their game in commemoration of the 24th anniversary of the genocide there. But really just talking about how there were a lot of opportunities within the Commonwealth Games to discuss political issues. Since this piece came out, we know that Tom Daley's made comments as well about decriminalisation of homosexuality in a lot of Commonwealth countries too. So I guess that was my key item, and I just wondered what you guys thought of it.
Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because the Commonwealth Games, perhaps a slightly toxic legacy from the colonialism. However, see, promoting itself as a very good platform for this kind of stuff. And I think sport and politics are kind of inextricably linked. And I think social media has kind of reinforced that over the last few years. And I think this is kind of a nice contrast to some of the stuff we've seen recently, particularly in America, about people expressing their political views and then being rather ostracised, in particular Colin Kaepernick in the NFL. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a positive thing. I think there are some, obviously, risks. But, for me, it's positive. Lee, what do you think?
I think it's just refreshing that any sport or sporting event is making any type of stand. Far too often we see all sports shy away from any political messaging, any social messaging. And again, I think you're exactly right that the NFL is huge for that. I think Premier League football in the UK is exactly the same. So my take would be that anything is a positive. Anything that starts discussions, uses sports to start discussions around issues, has to be taken as a positive. And hopefully other organisations and sporting events might follow suit.
I just wonder if those unusual, interesting origins, which are inherently political, actually gave the Commonwealth Games a kind of unique platform in that they can go, we recognise that we're based on a political platform or background, and in order to subvert this, we want to use our games as a positive platform for sort of political and social debate and change. So, Dave, what did you have?
Yeah, so mine was about sport and relationship with physical activity. It's by a chap called Richard Bailey, who follows us on Twitter. It's in the Huffington Post. And basically the premise of the article is saying that physical inactivity is a global kind of epidemic. It's a huge problem. It's costing healthcare systems a lot of money. But the strategies to combat that are kind of negating the value of sport. So in the article, it talks about how the kind of elite sport and that pyramid system of people dropping out is not helpful, but the premise of sport, of having fun, of being part of a team, of enjoying yourself, should be more of a part of the fight against physical inactivity and basically against non-communicable diseases. So I thought it was quite interesting, especially in the light of kind of Sport England's strategy, which focuses more on underrepresented groups and often shies away from sports and uses things like walking and things like that. So, yeah, I thought it was quite a positive article. Interesting to hear what you think about it.
It made me think of the This Girl Can campaign and a lot of the work that's gone into that. Those television adverts, the stuff that you see on the bus stops, they've very clearly said these are a whole different range of activities that you can participate in, and sports are very much one of them. So you see photos from rugby, from football, from basketball, from all sorts of different things, from netball. And these sports provide you with health benefits is very much shouted about as well through the campaign. And I thought that was an interesting one. Women in sport have some really interesting research, which I think informed a lot of This Girl Can campaign, that said some of the motivating factors for women to participate in sport are the looking good and feeling good aspect. And so not shying away from that when we promote sport is potentially something that we might be missing a trick with.
Yeah, and it's about promoting the different benefits, really, and that it's going to be different for different people. Lee, what do you think? Do you think we should be speaking about sport more when we're talking about physical activity, or actually does it put people off based on their kind of school experiences, for example?
I'm sure you're right that what we perceive as traditional sports or competition, league structures, more formal sport does put some people off. equally, I'm sure that competition side of things is a big driver for some people. Key for me, and we talked about this a little bit in the last podcast, is coaching. Where are the coaches coming from? I think all too often our coaches have played the sport at a reasonably high level, are a bit fanatical about the sport. If we could diversify our coaching base, get people to understand that different people have different drivers to why they play sport, and not everybody's concerned about winning trophies, finishing top of the league, then I think that would, set everything in a better stead.
That actually really resonates with my experience. One of the best coaches I've ever met, Denise, she's a cricket coach nominally, but she's got absolutely no cricketing background. But what she does really well is engage young people who wouldn't normally have the opportunity to be active. So she actually does a lot of work in hospitals through Capital Kids Cricket. But the thing that is always amazing to watch her is that, she focuses on the real positive benefits of cricket without getting caught up in those details around what you need to do in order to win. So I think there's clearly a place for recruiting people from outside of our traditional coaching pool.
Hi, I'm Charlie Gamble, the CEO of Tackle Africa, and you're listening to the Good Sports podcast.
Well, we're very excited to be joined by our first international guest, Paul Caccamo, CEO and founder of Up2Us Sports. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me here.
It's our pleasure. I did say international. So whereabouts are you at the moment, Paul?
At the moment, and that's the big point here, is because I can be anywhere in this country. I'm in New York, that little island off the coast of the United States, but I'm often traveling to all the other cities in this country trying to promote sports for good.
Fantastic. Well, we're delighted to have you on. So our podcast is all about learning. It's all about linking people up in the sports and development community. So if you could start off by telling us a bit more about Up2Us Sports. So what's your mission and how do you go about achieving it?
Our mission, Dave, at Up2Us Sports is that every kid achieves their potential because they have a coach who's trained in positive youth development. And so there's really two pieces there. One is that there's so many kids across the United States, and I know around the world, that because of economic situations, they don't have access to sports programs, and they don't have access to the role that coaches particularly can play in helping them to be successful in their lives. And so step one is, how do we get more coaches on the ground in these underserved communities? And then step two is, there's a difference between a coach and a trained coach. And how do we provide the kind of training to coaches that they can work in a community where a kid is facing all kinds of challenges, often stemming from poverty, but issues like violence that we're seeing all over the world? How do we help kids who are experiencing these kinds of stresses to see sports as an avenue to make better decisions for themselves and in their community and in school and in their everyday issues that they face? And a trained coach is able to do that. They're able to say, look at what you're capable of on a court or on a field or on a baseball diamond or, whatever the sport. And I expect these kinds of values and decisions that you make as an athlete to translate to the same kind of values and decisions you make at home, in school, and in your community. So two pieces. I started Up2Us Sports 10 years ago to say, at least in the United States for now, let's get as many coaches on the ground in communities that don't have sports programs, and let's get these coaches starting sports programs, expanding sports programs. And number two, let's train these coaches to be the best possible role models in our kids' lives.
Okay, I mean that's brilliant, and we've talked a lot previously on the podcast about the value of coaching. I'm just kind of interested to find out how you've developed these resources. So it's not out and out coaching; it's obviously coaching with that social message. So how have you developed those resources?
So developing, I take that question on two sort of avenues. One is simply getting the kind of donor community to recognize that sports isn't just some, after school activity that has no social value, that it's actually a learning environment. And one of the things I think that has always been sort of the narrative about sports is kids would show up for school in order to play sports after school. And that's a narrative that we're trying to change with donors, because it lets donors think that sports isn't important, that, it's only a carrot a carrot for a stick in terms of getting kids to go to school. But what we've tried to educate donors is that no, sports is actually life lessons in and of themselves. And there's a movement going around in this country, and I think globally, that we need to look at the social emotional learning of kids. That a lot of the reason kids fail is because nobody's really worried about their mental health, and nobody's really focusing on giving them the basic life skills that they can make better choices. So the first thing, and how we went about developing this, was educating the donor community in the United States that sports is education. Sports is social emotional learning. Sports is a pathway for success in and of itself. It is not a carrot or a stick to be held up against whether a kid goes to school during the day. In fact, going to sports may be the reason that a kid is successful in school and not vice versa, because sports teaches them things like resiliency and drive and focus and goal setting. So the first avenue to building this was just educating a donor community. And that community meant corporations. And we've had some wonderful support from corporations like Mercedes-Benz and Nike, Gatorade. It meant ESPN. So some of them obviously have sports in their DNA, but we also went outside to healthcare companies like Humana Healthcare. So educating companies that this is what sports means and is capable of, but also educating our government. So we are funded at this point by 9 government grants. And those grants stem from government agencies focused on how do we stop violence in urban America, to those who want to promote health and wellness, to those that want to promote academic achievement. And so by making that case, Dave, that sports is in and of itself an avenue to accomplishing all those goals, we've been able to get donors behind us. And then the second piece is working at the grassroots level with different communities in the United States to find out what's available and, most importantly, what's not available. And it's shocking to discover that, once again, as in so many things in our sort of modern day, sports is commodified. It's something that costs money. And therefore, you see a lot less sports programs in low-income urban areas than you do in suburban areas. And so going at the grassroots level and getting the urban communities together to rally and say, we want more sports activities because this is something that is a detriment to our kids, not having a coach, not having a team to belong to, not having a safe place to go after school, and working with them to identify if we were to get these donors to wake up and see how powerful sports is and to support a national coach workforce through Up2Us Sports, then help us find those coaches in your community and place those coaches in schools, parks, nonprofits in your neighborhood where they can do the best possible job in engaging your young people. And so it's been a twofold process to get this program going, but the results have been magical.
You kind of touched on the results there, and you talked about the donor education piece. So I presume that the two are kind of linked. So, how have you gone about evaluating your success, and then how have you kind of reflected that to donors to kind of get more on board?
Yeah, that's one of the most important questions for any of us in addressing social impact, whether it's through sports or any other means, is this issue of how do you show results? And we really went at that in two areas. One is we know sports has an impact on fitness and wellness. And so we literally went out and used a fitness tool, literally measuring whether or not kids are more fit when they've had one of our trained coaches. And I want to point out that there have been studies, believe it or not, because this is kind of shocking, that some kids who play sports are actually less physically active than kids who don't play sports because they have coaches who prefer the more talented athletes, and they end up sitting on benches, whether it's on practice day or game day. So they're better off being out on their own. So even though it seems intuitive that, yeah, if a kid plays sports, you're going to get more fitness outcomes. Once again, I want to point out that all comes down to the coach and whether or not the coach creates an inclusive and participatory atmosphere for the players. So step number one is let's show that our trained coaches get every single player more physically fit because they're part of that team, no matter what the sport. Step two is, and this goes to what I've been saying from when we started, which is that sports has these mental health benefits as well. So how do you look at what are the mental health benefits that translate to a child's long-term success? And so we actually gathered leaders from education and health and wellness and mental health and psychology, and we sort of looked at these two words that really seem to determine a child's ability to succeed into adulthood, and those are grit and resiliency. And those words, go across economic backgrounds. It doesn't matter if you grew up in a poor neighborhood or a rich neighborhood. To the extent that you can show your grit and resiliency is the extent that you'll probably succeed. So what does sports do to contribute to that? And so this was a process, Dave. It took us years to look at what are some of the mental health skills, and to be technical, the non-cognitive skills that lead to that lead to grit and resiliency. And we identified a bunch of them. Things like future focus, always having a goal in your activities, in your life, in your daily schedule. Plan B thinking. I mean, think about that. Whenever something happens, if you're a healthy person, you automatically think, okay, how am I going to handle this situation? What's my plan B? But if you're dealing with lots of stress and trauma, or you're a child growing up in poverty, your brain may shut down and you may not have a plan B for what happens if something goes wrong in school or at home or in the neighborhood. But sports teaches that. Sports automatically, when the offense changes their strategy, if you're the defender, you change yours. That's plan B thinking. And when a coach can point that out and say, I see that in you here as a player on this team, I want to see that when you're a student in school. These are the kinds of mental health skills that lead to resiliency and grit. And so we assembled 8 of these skills, and we developed some evaluation tools to look at our kids when they start with our coach, and then to look at them a year later after spending a year playing sports with a trained coach and see, have we moved the ball in terms of a kid being able to show these mental health skills, these executive function skills, and be a more capable person on and off the field. And that's where we've shown some incredible results. And that's where we've been able to attract a lot of funders, including our government support, to say that sports is impact. It's not just a game. It's a life skill impact activity. So that's how we've evaluated it.
That is fascinating. And I think grit and resiliency comes up a lot in economic podcasts, as you've kind of pointed out. So lots of free economics talk about it a great deal. So it's great to see that sport has a direct link to that. I'm just kind of curious about the training of the trainers. So are they teaching sport in a particular way? Are they incorporating messaging in that training, or are they just coaching in a kind of inclusive way, and that brings the benefit? So how does the actual resources for the trainers get developed?
Yeah, so I'll take a step back and say that on a given day, we have 350 to 400 coaches in our national coach corps that are in cities across the United States, and they are sponsored by our private and our public donors. So every one of those coaches, to get to your question, has to go through 40 hours of training during the course of a year with our trainers, because we want them to be trained, obviously, in achieving the physical, mental, and social health outcomes that we just talked about. So that training is also something that many of the programs and the schools and the park systems that have experienced our actual coaches and our coach workforce are actually asking, can you train the rest of my staff? Because your coaches are doing something different. And I want to incorporate that into my entire program, including staff who are not part of your coach workforce. So this is where our training has really taken off in and of itself. And what the training is about, what makes it different, Dave, is it's not like a curriculum. It's not like day one, you need to teach, 5 healthy foods and talk about 3 positive behaviors. It's not that kind of training, because that kind of training, first, it's easy, first of all, to get bored and lose yourself in like, okay, what day 6, day 7, it's too, it's not culturally appropriate for what coaching is. Coaching is a dynamic activity, as anyone who's ever done it knows. So what we go after, rather than a curriculum, is the methodology. We go after teaching our coaches about youth development and what works. In other words, how do you build a team, and what it really is a team? Have any coaches stopped to think about what makes a kid feel they belong to a group? How does issues like communication, norms, rituals that you set up as a coach make kids feel even more a part of a team than just a random, hey, we're all part of a meeting for football at 4:30 in the afternoon? No. We're going to sit down and we're going to structure how we run practice, how we communicate, how we come up with a team chant, a team logo. We're going to talk about what our expectations are of one another, not just from the coach to the kids, but the kids to one another as well. Then we go on even deeper and we start looking at issues like trauma and mental health, because where I place most of my coaches, as I mentioned, is underserved areas. Those kids are experiencing all kinds of stresses from violence, from poverty. So what should a coach know about that? And our argument is, when a coach understands that the impact of these kinds of stresses on a child's brain and on a child's reaction, including the fact that they can be easily triggered in sports as they can be in the community, then a coach knows how to address those. And a coach knows how to de-escalate conflict and become kind of a conflict resolution expert as well as a coach, which then contributes not just to that kid's mental health, but to the safety in the community. So we talk a lot about, how to deal with trauma, how to help kids overcome some of the stresses that they may be experiencing, how to learn the story of each and every kid on the team, and how to work with that narrative to then think about these resiliency and grit behaviors, which is what we introduce at the end, and to use them to coach kids to say, you're not going to be a statistic. You're going to be an incredibly fulfilled human being because you're part of this team, and I have these expectations. And that comes from training. That comes from really an interactive training, everything from slides that we show our coaches on how a child's brain developed, the impact of physical activity, the impact of being able to think and having a coach who challenges you to think during a sport activity, all the way to how our coaches just build positive relationships and enforce those relationships among players on the team. And there's a lot of games, exercises, interactive activities, and we measure this. We test our coaches all year to see whether or not they are retaining these philosophies in their coaching practice. And if they're not, we come back and train them again. And it's amazing how much opening the door to a coach seeing themselves as a youth development expert translates to a coach being more effective at teaching a sport and teaching a kid to be a success story.
I think that's fascinating. So you're almost changing the job role, in effect, to being a development worker rather than a coach. And I kind of wanted to ask, where do you get the trainers from, the coaches from, and do they coach specific sports, or is it a kind of multi-sport kind of offering that you do?
Yeah, and I just want to comment on your comment. Yes, we are changing the role of coaching to some extent, because in a lot of communities, that we're seeing in our low income and our underserved areas in the United States, that coach may be one of the most responsible and caring adults accessible in that entire kid's life. And I'm not undermining that there are many other positive influences in every community on our kids, but on a consistent level, every single day, the way coaches get to interact with kids, they may be a lifeline. And so we've got to change the role of coaching. I'm not saying we should put the whole weight of the world's responsibility on a coach, but we got to give them the tips and tools to use the thing they have with kids that so many adults don't have in under-resourced areas, in all areas, which is they have trust. Kids trust their coach. So they've got to take advantage of that trust and be the kind of influence that we are preparing them to be. In terms of our trainers, we develop our trainers within our organization, and it takes almost about a year for someone to start working for us to become a full-fledged trainer. And that's because, again, it's not about teaching them a curriculum. Sit down with coaches and say, this is what you do week 1, week 2. It's about teaching a philosophy. And our trainers have to be very dynamic trainers to get coaches to get this philosophy and incorporate it into their practice. And in terms of our coaches, that's one of the most important questions, I think, of our conversation today is, where do we get our coaches? We really focus on getting our coaches from the same communities as our kids. And that's because coaching, and this is a whole nother topic, it's an avenue for young adults to learn that they themselves can become change agents in their community, that they can become leaders, that there is a career path around coaching, whether you decide to become a professional coach or whether you decide that in coaching a sport that I grew up with and I loved in this neighborhood, I've now discovered that I want to, be a program director at a nonprofit. I want to work at Parks and Recs. I want to be a high school phys ed instructor. And I feel that in this environment where, we see a lot of economic divide, that sports in and of itself and coaching plays a role in elevating opportunity for young people in under-resourced neighborhoods to become leaders and to become economically viable through something they love. And so most of our coaches come from the same neighborhood as the kids, and the vast majority of our coaches, they step up and they coach with us, and a year or two later, they are off working full-time in one of the programs, in one of the parks departments, or they're pursuing for the first time a higher education in youth development, in physical education. And it's really one of the greatest pleasures in running this program to see its impact on coaches, let alone the kids themselves.
That's pretty powerful and inspiring stuff. I just wanted to, we will go back to Up2Us Sports, but I just wanted to touch quickly on the kind of wider sport and development in the US. See, we're UK based, and we see on Twitter things going around the globe. But how would you assess the kind of public's attitude towards sports and development, and how has the kind of industry grown in your time?
I feel like I'm a veteran in this because when I 20-something years ago, I helped start a program and grew it all over the United States that was focused specifically on soccer and how to use soccer to address literacy. And from that, I proved that if you could turn some school teachers into soccer coaches, that you suddenly had the attention of kids who sometimes were 2 or 3 grades behind literacy level, but now their teacher was their coach, and they'd do anything to learn to express themselves, whether as a soccer player or as a student in a classroom. And that's where I got my start, was 20 years ago, training teachers to be soccer coaches to build these kinds of bridges with students who were suffering from illiteracy. And it was fascinating to see that develop and to make the case, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, to make the case that, look, sports is a direct line to other outcomes like academic achievement. And so when I made that case 20 years ago, I have to honestly say there was not a lot of listeners and there was not a lot of believers, because once again, sports was sort of written off, and sports and development in this country was kind of seen as, it's sports, it's frivolous, it happens on its own, and we'll leave it at that. And so I've watched over 2.5 decades now that it has really taken off. We still have a long way to go in terms of funders, and I'd like to see some of the global corporations in America understand their duty and responsibility to look at these non-traditional, by that I mean these extracurricular, if you will, activities like sports, to see their role as being advocates for them, not just in this country, but around the world, because so much funding comes from the United States. And I'd like to see more of our global corporations pay attention to what we're doing. But from a domestic perspective here in this country, we have seen a lot of positive developments. And some of those have included umbrella groups that are, and there's quite a few that have sprung up that are really trying to organize now and make this conversation a policy issue in the United States, going to mayors across the country, going to the federal government and saying we should be doing more around sports. We should be doing more around evaluating its impact on social emotional learning, which is so critical for the long-term success of our youth. So we're seeing a lot of different groups spring up on policy, on organizing, just bringing different sports programs together to share best practices, on offering different tools, sports and violence prevention, sports and health and wellness. So I think it's taken off, because I can tell you 25 years ago when I sat and said we should make public school teachers soccer coaches, it was a very lonely voice at the time for people to think that that kind of interaction can happen between sports and other social achievements like academics and wellness. So I think we've made a lot of progress. I think there's a long way to go. And I think we've got to continue to educate in the United States our corporate leaders so that they can play an impact on their global funding on helping sports programs around the world.
And just as part of that development, I know that you've just sort of partnered with the Baltimore Ravens from the NFL. Could you just tell us a bit more about that partnership and how that works?
So, I think, and this may be a guess, but I think like some of the football clubs in the UK have perhaps been more open and receptive to the fact that sports is their DNA and they should be investing in it. I hope that's the case there, but it's been very interesting in the United States. I think a lot of teams don't see, for the same reason I've been saying, they don't see investing in sports as a plausible use of their community outreach. They see instead like, and obviously I support any cause that leads to better quality of life for any of us. But, they traditionally, the owners of these teams have said, okay, here's an illness or a disease that has affected me, so I want our team's philanthropy to go there. Or here is a cause in the city that, that has gotten a lot of attention, so we'll align ourselves with that. And I feel it's critical that sports teams, professional teams in particular, understand you can do all those things, but at the end of the day, your fans benefit not just by viewing your sport, but by understanding that the activity that, you profit from is actually an activity that can create stronger communities, healthier kids, and better outcomes for the entire neighborhoods around their stadiums and their fan base. And so we've been making the case, whether it's the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, Major League Soccer, we've been making the case, hey, sports is your DNA. Sports has a direct link to improving the quality of the lives of the communities around your stadiums, improving the lives of the kids and the families that are your fan base, so you should be investing in it. So, having said all that, it's been a great joy and source of pride to see a team like the Baltimore Ravens, a city which has wonderful, wonderful attributes, and anyone who comes to America definitely should stop in Baltimore and see its sort of historical role it's played and all the assets it has, but it also has challenges. And there is a lot of, it's made the news because of a lot of the violence we've seen among young people, a lot of the poverty that is entrenched in certain Baltimore neighborhoods. And to see the Ravens say, hey, sports can be a solution. We are the franchise in town. People love their Ravens in Baltimore. We should be investing in sports as an avenue through Up to Us, through coaches. They're going to find coaches from the same neighborhoods where these challenges exist. They're going to elevate them to be leaders. They're going to engage kids who may have nothing to do during an after-school hour to say, now you have something to do. You have a team to belong to, and this is going to impact you in the community and in the schools. And I give, a lot of kudos to the Ravens for stepping up and making this kind of an investment and this kind of an example.
That's amazing. And I think, just to reflect your point, in England, there's a lot of foundations who are doing work through sport. But I mean, it's amazing that you've kind of got that result with a huge franchise out there. So that feels like another kind of monumental shift. Paul, it's been absolutely incredible hearing your work and your passion for it. I just wanted to we've got a few questions at the end that I just wanted to kind of wrap up with. So you've kind of talked through this, but what does sport and development mean to you?
Sport and development means addressing the fundamental need for the next generation, because I always look at it from a youth perspective, to have all the tools possible to be fulfilled. And I guess it comes down to our mission at Up to Us, to achieve their potential. And there's development of young people, and that can include everything from education to healthcare services, social services, workforce development. But there's sport and development because sport plays a unique role in providing values and a platform for value development, for relationships that are positive, that can help a young child achieve their potential. And that's why sport needs to be linked with development, just like all those other categories do as well.
My last question, which is one we ask everyone, what is your proudest moment in sport and development?
I have to say that it's ironic that, someone asked this question right after this happened. I was at a big event in Chicago that we were doing to raise support with a group called World Sports Chicago for coaches all over the city that we want to start placing over the next 5 years. And somebody came up to me and said to me, I just was looking for you all day at this event. And he was a young man, and he grew up in one of the most violent neighborhoods in Chicago. And he said, the reason I wanted to find you is because when I was in sixth grade in Chicago public schools, my grandmother was so worried about me that she looked for programs. And there was this one soccer program that was run by teachers in our school. And as you may recall from our conversation, Dave, that I had started that program in Chicago and many cities across the country. So he said that he enrolled in it and became a soccer player and played his entire high school, and it kept him out of trouble. But he still didn't have money to get a job when he graduated. So he said that he looked around for opportunities, and there happened to be this coach program called Up2Us Sports that was looking for young people from the same neighborhoods that they wanted to expand to be coaches. So he said to me, then I became a coach through your second program, Paul. And he said, and now I just want to introduce myself as the program director for one of the largest soccer nonprofits in the west side of Chicago. You can't have a better moment than that. I mean, that's what those of us in this field live for.
That is incredible. So, Paul, how can people find out more about Up2Us Sports?
So our website is up2ussports.org. That's UP2 ussports.org. And just please go to the website. There's a link for asking other questions or reaching out to me and my team.
Fantastic. Paul Caccamo, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. And thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thanks for the opportunity to share my story and our work. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so we're going to do a quiz now. It's on the International Day of Sports and Development for Peace, which is on the 6th of April. So it's a really simple quiz. Just buzz in if you know the answer. If the first person gets it wrong, then the other person has an opportunity to answer. So it's 5 questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
I am ready, David.
Okay, question 1. Which tennis star is the UN Ambassadors for Sport and Peace?
Buzz.
Go on.
Roger Federer.
That's incorrect. Sarah, do you know?
Is it Novak Djokovic?
That is correct. Well done.
Yes.
Well played.
Okay, so question 2. Which sport also shares its day with April the 6th? Bit of a clue, it can be played in a pub.
Buzz.
Lee.
Darts.
That is incorrect.
Snooker?
Also incorrect, it is table tennis. Of course, that pub is in East London. So
We don't play table tennis in the pubs round here.
Well, I thought it was a clue anyway. Right, question 3. Why is the white card used in the campaign?
Buzz?
Sarah?
Is it symbolic of peace?
It is, correct. So it comes from Maud Benos. She had an exhibition of paintings of children. She used the white card as a play on red card in sport, with the white symbolising peace and unity. So 2-0 to Sarah, all to do, Lee?
Yep, no problem.
Okay, so question 4. When was the first International Day for Sport Development and Peace?
Buzz?
Sarah?
I reckon it was like a turn of the century kind of thing, so year 2000.
That is incorrect. Lee?
Yeah, much more recent than that. 2014.
That is correct. Lee lives to fight another day. Okay.
Good job, Lee.
Okay, for this question, I want you to name any 3 of the positive outcomes encouraged by sport according to the UN.
Buzz?
Sarah?
Unity, fair play, and integration.
I'm only going to give you 2 there.
Ooh.
There's no mention of fair play. Lee, for the win, can you name?
Gender equality.
Correct.
Yeah, communities, bringing communities together.
Yeah. Social integration.
The fitness aspect, the health benefits.
Health promotion and disease prevention. This is incredible. He has come back from the dead. It is 2-2. Okay, for this eventuality, I do have a tiebreaker. Sarah, as you're 1-0 down in the series, you have the choice of going first or second. It's guessing a number. Which do you choose?
I'm going to go second, Dave.
Second, no problem. So the question is, how many countries feature the project in the 2017 International Day for Sport Development and Peace? Lee?
Wow, that is not easy. I will say 123.
123. Sarah?
I'm going to go higher, so I'm going to go 170.
170, which is a very good guess. It is 180 countries, which is pretty incredible, participated in the 2017 day. So, Sarah, congratulations.
Yay!
Well played, Sarah.
Thank you very much. Well played, you.
That's a 1-1 in the series, and that concludes this episode's quiz. Thank you very much, guys. If you click on our website, goodsportscast.org.uk, you can see our blog, which has the website, april6.com, where you can find out more about the International Day for Sport Development and Peace.
So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Good Sports Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Please do get in touch with comments and questions and thoughts via the usual ways, on Twitter @GoodSportsCast, on the website goodsportscast.org.uk, and via email info@goodsportscast.org.uk. As a bit of a teaser for the next episode, 2/3 of the team, Sarah and Lee, are heading to Jordan to use cricket as a tool for engaging with the refugee community there. So be sure to listen to that. As for now, thanks and bye.